Thanks for having me. And the title that James and I agreed some time ago for this talk is A Republic If You Can Keep It. And I would be surprised if any of you have not heard that at least once before, that famous line, probably many times. You undoubtedly know that it's attributed to Benjamin Franklin as he was leaving the Constitutional Convention around 1788 or 89. A woman approached him wanting to know, well, what is the result of your work? Of course, it was the Constitution. And she apparently put the question this way. She said, Mr. Franklin, what form of government have you given us? And Franklin's famous reply was, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Well, I don't know what her response or what she thought at that moment, but I have to tell you that I think Franklin's reply was immensely profound. Lots of meaning to it. I think Franklin was in effect saying, we put some things on paper here that we're very proud of. You should be too. And they go further in the direction of guaranteeing the rights and the freedoms of individuals than any previous document in human history. Plenty of room for improvement. No founder thought that they had reached the end of the line and things could never be improved from what they had done. Many of them longed for some improvements that sooner or later, in fact, did come. But in any event, Franklin was saying, we've put all these wonderful things down on paper. We've given you something, a framework for governance that should guarantee more people, more freedoms than anybody ever had before. But take it from there, not only expand it when you can, carry out its principles to their fullest extent, but by all means, I think Franklin was saying, make sure that these principles live in your hearts, because ultimately they are scraps of paper. We've written some stuff down and now it's on paper. Well, big deal. Paper doesn't always last very long, but principles can, but only if people take them to heart, if they embrace them and say, wow, I believe this. These are important. I will stand by them. I will fight for them. I will teach them to my kids. That's what Franklin was saying. You know, whether or not these wonderful things we've put on paper are going to last, you know, how many future generations will still live under them and enjoy their benefits is not something we can determine or tell you now. It all depends upon the ideas of the people and succeeding generations, what they do, how they think, how they vote, what concepts they embrace and what they don't embrace. And so Franklin said, we've done the best that we can. Take it from here, fix it, improve it where you can, but don't forsake the core principles that we've written down. This really, his statement was a call to, I've used this term now several times, but it was a call to principles. It was saying, in effect, know what you believe in something. And our system depends upon certain concepts that must be accepted widely or they will collapse. They must be embraced by people who say, yes, that's right, I will stand by it. This runs counter, of course, to the open mind philosophy, for want of a better term, but I hear this from time to time. I'm sure you do too. People say, what a great virtue it is to have an open mind. And to that, I always say, well, yes and no. I mean, you should have an open mind to the extent that if new evidence and experience tells us that something we thought was the case no longer is, you should not say, it doesn't matter, I'm going to stick to it anyway. Sometimes you have to embrace new evidence, new ways of thinking, because they do make sense. They're rooted in truth, and they help us understand that maybe something we thought was the case before might not have been exactly that way. So in that sense, you have to keep an open mind. But that doesn't mean, having an open mind should not mean that we never come to a conclusion, that we keep our mind perpetually open and undecided on any matter. I mean, how could life be livable if you just say, well, I don't know anything and I haven't learned anything. I don't want to come to any conclusion because that seems harsh and too decisive. I think the words of a famous theologian, N.T. Wright, are very appropriate here. Here's what he wrote. He said, "The purpose of an open mind is like the purpose of an open mouth, that it might be shut again on something solid." Think of that. The purpose of an open mind is like the purpose of an open mouth, that it might be shut again on something solid. He went on to say, yes, we must be free to ask questions, but when we hear a good answer, we must be prepared to recognize it as such and not be so keen on keeping all the questions open that we shy away from an answer just because we like having an open mind. That is the way to intellectual as well as spiritual starvation. Um, I hear people all the time suggest that having a perpetually open mind on anything and everything, it seems, is somehow superior to possessing an opinion or embracing a principle. And I think that the only time that that might be true uh, would be when an opinion or a principle is knee jerk or poorly considered or illogical or untrue or unfounded or swept away by new evidence. Uh, there's some things in which it's obvious that a closed mind is an informed one, such as the question, does the sun come up in the east or does it come up in the west? It's not a sign of wisdom to claim that your mind is still open on the matter and then wait around every morning to see what happens. That's something you can say it's pretty well settled. Now, if for some reason tomorrow we discover, wow, the sun came up in the north, then we might have to re-examine our premises. But it's a pretty safe bet that we can make plans, we can make assumptions, we can build further assumptions from the core concept that it comes up in the east and it settles in the west. And it seems to do that all the time. Some people view principles negatively, as I've sort of hinted already. They think, oh, that man is so principled. He's rigid. He's an ideologue. He's closed-minded. But often those charges turn out to be just a way of dismissing another person's principles while holding fast to our own. We doesn't mean we don't have any. It sometimes means, yeah, we have them, but that we're not happy with the fact that the other guy holds to principles that are different from ours. Most people, however, I think instinctively admire someone who seems to believe in something. Isn't that true? Don't you don't you tend to gravitate toward, let's say, people in public life, the ones who tell you, here's where I stand. Here's what I will do because I believe in these things. Vote for me for these reasons. I think we tend to like that or trust that more than somebody who says, well, just vote for me and I'll tell you later what I believe. Or kind of like Nancy Pelosi saying we have to pass the bill before so you can find out what's in it. Um, Nobody really admires that kind of thinking. We like people who say, I've learned something, I've come to some conclusions, these are my principles, I offer them to you for your consideration. If you don't agree with me, then don't vote for me. One of my favorite comedians of all time was Groucho Marx. And in one of his movies, he's the leader of a fictional country, and he says to an audience of people, those are my principles. If you don't like them, well, I have others. And if you don't like them, I have others, which is another way of saying, I really don't have any principles, or I'll just have whatever you want me to have at this moment. And if the next audience wants me to have different principles, I'll have them. That's just another way of saying my principles are so shallow. I believe in them so ephemerally that I'll drop them at the drop of a hat, just to be popular with a crowd. We don't admire that. We laugh at that. He was a comedian for a good reason, but we don't say, wow, that's the kind of leader I want. Somebody who tells me what I want to hear and never tells me the truth if he thinks it will be of some disadvantage to him. I don't know who first said it, but whoever it was should get a medal for observing, quote, if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. I think there's a lot of truth to that. If you ask a 10-year-old, what do you believe in? What principles do you hold? And try this. If you have a 10-year-old or any child of that age or near it, ask them, what do you believe in? What principles do you hold? And tell them you want to hear something important. You don't want to hear mundane things like, well, my dog is black, my house is brown. You want to hear loftier, more important things. What are the principles that you hold? A 10-year-old might understandably say, well, I don't know yet. And we would forgive that. We wouldn't think that's some kind of a sin. We'd say, well, he's young. He's got a lot of growing to do. But if you ask a 40-year-old the same question, and he says the same thing, if he says, oh, I don't know, I haven't come to any conclusion yet, I guess I haven't learned anything, we don't admire that. And if you ask a 70-year-old, what do you believe in? What are your principles? And they're still walking around saying, I don't know, I haven't made my mind up on anything yet. I would say, oh my gosh, what a wasted life. I think we're put here on earth to use our faculties to come to some conclusions and to act on principles we've come to believe are sound, honest, truthful, that work, that are drawn from something eternal. Principles aren't just moral axioms. They certainly can be. Lots of them are. Like truth is good, honesty is the best policy. Those are moral axioms that are sound principles. The golden rule is another example. Do unto others what you would have others do unto you. That's a pretty good principle to follow. But principles can be more than just moral axioms. They can be facts from experience that we regard as true, proven. They can be lessons of history. I'm going to give you some in a few moments. They can be lessons from economics. And because that's another specialty of mine, we'll talk about that as well. I think a useful exercise at any age, and I wish my parents had done this with me, but a useful exercise at any age would be to sit down and write up the principles you believe in, then look at it, put it away, and look at it every 5 years and see, which ones you might now change or give a lower rank of priority, and which ones you might add. Hopefully, every 5 years, if you do this, you'll find that your list of principles is getting longer. That's a sign you're learning. You're experiencing some things that you can say, I believe that. Wouldn't it be great to have such a list that you've added to and revised every 5 years by the time you get to 80 or 90 years of age and be able to say, wow, I've got a kind of a picture of my thought processes over my entire life on this sheet of paper or several sheets of paper that I've been doing since I was 10. So I throw that out as, for those of you who have kids, consider doing that. I think they would find in 50, 60, 70 years, they'd love to look back at that and see how it changed over the years. Well, America's founders were certainly principled, and I raise them in part because we have a magnificent opportunity coming up in just a few months to celebrate an important anniversary. As you know, this July 4 will mark the 250th anniversary of the birth of America by the issuance of the Declaration of Independence on that date in 1776. What a wonderful opportunity. I hope we don't miss to think about things like, wow, what did they believe in? What brought them to do the remarkable things that they did? And which of those principles are just so good, so eternal that I want to uphold them and stand by them today? I hope we think of this coming July 4 as much more than just a day of lots of fireworks. I hope we think of it as a day to reflect, and the months leading up to it should be months of reflection about the ideas, the principles that led America's founders to bequeath us what they did, this magical place we call America. Never perfect, but wow, the lodestar for the world in so many ways. And I want to talk a little bit about the founders. If you were to ask, I think almost any of them today, if we could gather them in a room and say, um, tell us when the revolution started. You might be expecting them to say, oh, well, it started with Lexington and Concord, April of 1775, when the first shots were fired of what became the War for Independence. Or others might say, no, it really started when we issued the Declaration of Independence. I think that most of the founders would say, no, 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 you're getting it wrong. You're describing some manifestations of a revolution that had already happened in the minds and the hearts of the American people. If there was a starting date for this transformation, maybe it was 1760, because that was the year that George III ascended to the throne in Britain. And he ended the long-standing period of what the colonists called salutary neglect, which meant, for decades, the mother country sort of left us alone, and we managed to build our own institutions and think of ourselves as, British colonists, but we are also a distinct people, and we believe in the traditional rights of Englishmen and so forth. And when George III began to end that, began to treat people in America differently than Englishmen back home, as if we were second-class citizens through things like taxation without representation. You can thank the Parliament for that as much or more than the king. Then the colonists, who were becoming increasingly principled, said, wait a minute, that's not right. And coming as they did near the end of the so-called Enlightenment, they were increasingly interested in things like individual rights, individual liberties. They were far less likely in 1776 than they were in 1760 to say, whatever the king says goes, because they had come to embrace the principles of liberty that they thought George III and the Parliament increasingly were violating. So our founders would say the revolution first occurred in the minds of American colonists, and then finally circumstances and personalities came together in such a way that by 1776, we'd had enough of British rule, and we were determined to get rid of it, even at the cost of a war. Well, what were the principles that by 1776 had crystallized in the minds of the founding generation? Any of them would tell you, well, we had many. But here are just two that I want to mention that are apropos to our event today. One of the principles, needless to say, perhaps, is liberty. This was, it's a term in various ways, freedom, which is thought of as, roughly the same thing, often been on people's lips for centuries, but this was the first time that a society rose up to achieve it by dethroning a monarchy and instead putting the people in charge. How many regimes say, oh, we're for the people? Socialists love to say, we're for the people. Well, this was the first time, really, when a new system, as it turned out, really was for the people. It was set up by and of and for the people. It dethroned the monarchy. When you think about it, liberty is a darn important thing, isn't it? Everybody says they're for it. Nobody says they're against it, even though many people don't vote as if they think it's a high value, unfortunately. But it really is the whole purpose of life. That's how important it is. Life without it, life without liberty, I think, is unthinkable. Unthinkable. Can you imagine living in, say, perhaps the most tyrannical society on the planet right now is North Korea? And from what we know of life there, can you imagine living in a situation where you have to be concerned about your every thought, let alone your actions? Because some guy at the top has total power. He can snuff you out at the drop of a hat. He doesn't even have to put you on trial. He can just, Iran, I see from a note there. Can you imagine living in a place like that where, wow, you're monitored and watched over and threatened and penalized and told that you follow orders all the time? I don't know about you, but I would not want to live in such a situation. I could not be myself. To live in such a tyrannical environment means that you're not living your life. Somebody else, the guys with political power, they're living their lives through you. And we ought to be asking the question, as America's founders did, well, why do they get to do that? Why are they special? Why can't I? I'm another human being too. Why can't I do that to them? And, well, let them answer that. I don't think there is a good answer. They're not blessed with some inherent God given right to oppress other people any more than you have the right to oppress them or anybody else. So I don't want to, frankly, live a lifetime of following other people's orders at every turn. I would just feel like, well, what's my purpose here? Just to be a cog in this guy's machine? Well, our founders really understood how important liberty was. It really is what you have to have in order to be yourself. If I came from another planet to observe Earthlings and report back, one of the first things I would tell my superiors back home was, wow, you won't believe this, but they're all different. There's 8 billion of them, and who knows how many billion more that lived at one time or another. And there's no evidence that any two of them have been exactly alike. They're all unique. Even the ones that look alike, they're not the same. And, that has profound implications for things like liberty, because we wouldn't have a case for liberty if we were all robots. If I reported back home to my planet and said, well, they're just identical. Every one of them, of these Earthlings, they look the same, they act the same, they act like they're just programmed. There wouldn't be a case for liberty. Liberty for what? But the fact that we're all different means that to be truly who you are, all the unique things that make you up, you have to have considerable choice in life. It's your choices that are expressions of what's you, of what's in your mind, what makes up your values and ambitions and so forth. So the less you're able to make choice, the less liberty you have, which is another way of saying the less you are you, and the more you're just somebody else who programmed you. So liberty is pretty important. It flows directly from an essential feature of our human nature, our individuality, our uniqueness. A second principle that our founders would say they adhere to is that individuals have rights. That wasn't universally held over the centuries. For most of the time, in most of the world before the Declaration of Independence, people thought, if they thought anything at all about rights, they tended to think of them as, well, they're what the government gives us. They're what the emperor tells us we have a right to. He decides that. But America's founder said, no, 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 no. We're dethroning the monarchy. Rights don't come from the king or the parliament or government in any form. They claimed, and you could disagree with this, of course, but they claimed that rights come from our creator. I heard a speech once from a person this was at a conference in Prague just a few years ago, Czech Republic. And he started his talk by saying, there can be only 3 possible sources of rights. Where do rights come from? Oh, one of only 3 places. One is rights come from the government. And then he proceeded to do a good job by saying, explaining why that's not viable. What do you mean it comes from the government? What gives them the right to decide what rights I have? What makes them special? Don't they put their pants on one leg at a time like everybody else? And if you say rights come from the government, then I guess your rights are not inherent in you. They're just whatever the dictator of the moment decides to let you have. Nothing universal about them. It all depends on him. That's not viable. And then if he has the right to determine them, what gives him that right? And why can't I tell him what rights he has? The second option as to where rights could come from is from your creator, from God. And then the speaker said the third option, and by the way, he didn't like that second option. He said he identified as an atheist, and he said, so I don't believe they come from God because I don't think God exists. And then he said the only other option is that they come from natural law. They stem from man's basic nature, the fact that we're unique, that we're, you know, you can't be who you are, as I've mentioned, unless you exercise certain things we call rights. And I had to correct him when it was my turn to speak. I said, no, 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 I think those are not the only three options as to where rights come from: government, God, or natural law. I said there is a fourth option, and it's a combination of the second and the third. They come from God and they come from natural law. And the reason that you can combine those two is that if you believe in God, you believe that He, among other things, created natural law, or natural law flows directly from His creation. He made sure that we have an ordered universe. He didn't just create a random mess, unpredictable from one moment to the other, with laws that apply today and don't apply tomorrow, and that sort of thing. So I think the fourth option really is personally the most viable. Your rights come from, uh, yeah, natural law, which is perfectly compatible with the what the Creator has told us in the Bible, because He created natural law. So, but that's a matter that each of you can decide which one do you think. But our founders, for the most part, would say, yeah, it's a combination of two and three. Our founders learned a great deal from ancient Rome. And this is where we get a little bit into some history here. Uh, the founding fathers looked to the Roman Republic, not the empire that came later, but the first 500 years of ancient Roman history, that of the Republic. They admired many of the elements of the Republic and incorporated them into our Constitution. The connection between America and its Constitution and the structure of government and the environment of individual rights in the ancient Roman Republic, that connection is very, very strong. Our founders knew their history of ancient Rome far better, I think, than today's generations do, by and large. And the average citizen did too. The average citizen back then knew who Cato was and Cicero, and because this was part of the American canon of education. You learn from ancient societies, and the Roman Republic was regarded by America's founders as a good example of of good governance. They wanted to learn from it, copy its best features, but this is a big but. They wanted to do what they could to put in motion a system that wouldn't implode as the ancient Roman Republic did. They hoped that what they created would last longer. So they looked for flaws. They looked for, well, what did the Romans do that we can avoid, that caused their eventual decline into an imperial autocracy? But you look at what they copied from the Romans, it's amazing. Rome was the ancient Roman Republic was founded in 509 BC, pretty much the same way that America was founded. It was founded in a revolt against monarchy, against the concentration of power in the hands of one person. Rome had had a succession of 7 kings, and by number 7, they had gotten fed up with that. They were tyrannical, megalomaniacs, and they finally rose up and overthrew the 7th king. And of course, immediately then the issue was, well, what do we do? What do we do in place of the kings that we hated? And they set up this amazing thing called a republic, as Americans would do all those centuries later. And interesting to see what the features were. The core of the Roman Republic concept was the dispersion of power. Right from the top, the Roman Republicans said, we don't want one man rule anymore, but we have to have somebody that kind of runs the show. So we'll put 2 people at the top, and they call them consuls. But they also said there's still a danger that one or both of these guys will accumulate power, get drunk with it, and tyrannize over the people. So what do we do to make sure they don't do that? So they did things like uh, they put term limits in place. They said the consuls could only serve 1 year and then they had to get out. By the way, I looked in history at term limits, which I think do help to limit power. Ultimately, it's the ideas of the people, that matter more than these structural things. But I found that there was a country in from 1450 to 1808 anyway is when it expired because Napoleon invaded it. But for several hundred years, this society along the Adriatic in largely what is now Croatia was called Ragusa, a fabulously wealthy trading kingdom and a very free one of the freest enclaves in Europe for hundreds of years. And they believed in term limits so strongly that their top person, who was called the rector, guess how long he could serve? You know, I cited the Roman consuls only 1 year. Well, the rector in Ragusa, I think, had probably the strictest term limits I've ever found in history. 1 month. 1 month. He could no sooner move in than he had to move out. There was no reason to move his furniture in because he just had to haul it out in another month. And well, you might think, well, that's pretty unworkable, but it worked for them for I think it was 450 years, 1358 to 1808. So isn't that 450 years, something like that? We can agree or disagree as to what the proper limit is, but the Romans said 1 year and you're out, and you could come back later. I forget now how many years had to pass, but you couldn't serve another year for a little while anyway. And they also said the decisions of one of the consuls could overrule the decisions of the other. So those two guys had to be unanimous to get anything done. But they did more than that. The ancient Romans said, okay, we're going to have some legislative bodies because we don't want all power to be exercised by two guys. So they said, we'll create a Senate, and its members will be made up of people who can trace their lineage to the earliest of Romans when the city was founded in 750 BC. So that becomes a body of largely noble representatives of noble families. And then they also created elected representative assemblies. And lots of people in Rome, not everybody, Rome always had slaves, but lots of people could vote. And increasingly, as the Roman Republic goes along, you'll find that the debates and all these various houses of government will end up moving some power away from the Senate and in the direction of the popularly elected assemblies. And to some degree, that's a good thing. It made government more responsive. It made more people feel more involved. It wasn't just a noble who told you what to do, but you could run for office and vote for those who represented you. Well, all this that we take for granted today was new stuff when the Roman Republic was experimenting with it. And it was under this arrangement that, in spite of the flaws, the shortcomings, that Rome became the center of the world's wealth. It became a very prosperous society. It stretched from the fringes of North England near Scotland all the way across Southern Europe and the Mediterranean, the Middle East. And later the empire, after the Republic collapsed, would stretch it a little further before it all shrunk and collapsed in 476 AD. But our founders said, wow, look at that. We want to create something like that, but we want to make sure the bad features are held at bay. I was just the other day reading in the book of Acts in the Bible. This would be at the time of Paul in the late first century AD. So the empire is already 100 years old. The republic has expired. Now you got emperors not as free a place as before. But even then, what does Paul do when he gets arrested? on multiple occasions. He says, wait a minute, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't just beat me. You can't just throw me in jail. I'm entitled to a trial by jury. And I'm at the point in the book of Acts where the governor who succeeded Felix, Festus, he's reluctant to punish Paul, as Paul's enemies are encouraging him to do, because he's saying, I don't think he's violated any Roman law. He just disagrees with some of you people on religious matters, but he's entitled to a trial by jury. So even in the early centuries of the imperial autocracy, the leftovers from the old republic, like trial by jury, were still honored. So you could still have progress on many fronts when you have some semblance of things like the rule of law. Also, I want to say a few things about the lessons of economics. Okay, not just of touched on history. I encourage you to study ancient Rome. I have a book coming out in April about the American Revolution, and one of its chapters is all about the Roman connection, with a lot more in it in just that one chapter than I've been able to tell you here today. But let's work toward a conclusion here by offering a few lessons from economics. Economics is, some of us majored in it, so we had to study it for years. So you never learn everything there is to know about it. The list of lessons in economics could go on for days and days and days. But let me just sum up a couple of the more important ones that are so relevant to today. And this is a lesson really from both economics and from history. And it comes down to this: socialism doesn't work. Freedom and free markets is the cure. If you've tried it, if you've tried socialism, ultimately you're going to need a cure for it. And freedom and free markets are that cure. I'm leading up to a very important point, and that is that I don't know of any society in all of history that in which freedom and free markets, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, entrepreneurialism, freedom in the economy, I don't know of any society where they've had that and it screwed things up so bad that they had to have socialism come in and fix it. That's just unheard of. It's the other way around, time and time and time again. You see it in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez, 25 years ago, promises we're going to give you stuff and all this socialism, and what is it now? It's an absolute basket case. Some people promote democratic socialism. Even Hugo Chavez in Venezuela said that's what he was for. He was for democratic socialism. But what they don't fully comprehend is that the socialism part is always at war with the democratic part. And lo and behold, look in Venezuela, the guy who comes to power, I'm voted in, I believe in democratic socialism. What does he do as he builds a socialist state? He starts to muzzle the media. He starts to shut down dissenting newspapers and radio stations. People don't want to just sit back and be told what to do at every turn. So he has to keep an eye on them, has to monitor them, put cameras everywhere and so forth. So the socialism part, which is never voluntary, requires a surveillance state that wipes out the democratic part. And meantime, the socialism in the economy, by stripping away rights to private property, ensures a kind of economic disaster. Look at Britain. After World War II, you had Clement Attlee and the Labour Party coming to power, and their platform was democratic socialism. We're going to nationalize businesses. We're going to have the government fix prices. We're going to give you stuff. We're going to do all this stuff. And okay, that went on for a little while. By the 1970s, Britain became the sick man of Europe, and it took a Margaret Thatcher to start undoing some of that. It's never the other way around. It's not that capital has caused economic disaster and socialism somehow cures it and brings us prosperity. Argentina is going through that right now after decades of socialism. Javier Milei now in office, and what's he doing? Is he saying, "Oh, the answer to this disaster is more socialism"? No. He's saying we got to slash the size and the scope and the intrusiveness of government, respect private property and the rule of law, or we're headed for the dumpster of history. After World War II, as the mother country, under Clement Attlee, Britain, headed down a socialist path, you had a little British enclave in South Asia called Hong Kong that went in the other direction. It had a leader named John James Copperthwaite, who said, we're not going the socialist path. Unfortunately, Britain didn't micromanage Hong Kong at that time. He was in charge, so he could do what he wanted. He said, we're just a chunk of rock here. We're only 700,000 people. We don't have much in the way of resources except a very nice harbor. We need freedom if we want to progress. We need to get out of people's way and let them produce, let them solve their problems. We don't have the answers to their problems. So he inaugurated what became for years ranked every year as the freest economy on the planet. What happened? Did they have disaster? No. Hong Kong became one of the great Asian tigers, a flourishing economy with among the highest standards of living in the world, as the mother country sunk into the mire of socialism and the disaster that it created. Well, that's an important lesson to learn. I mean, when you hear people today saying we ought to put the people or the government in charge of things, and then we need to start saying that's not a lesson from history I ever learned. It's not one that's self-evident. It seems to be just the opposite. I'll give you a few other quick principles, and then I know I need to open it to questions. How long have we gone, James? Am I already over my time?
You're quickly getting to the end of your time.
Okay.
So
I'll get there
very
even
quick,
quicker.
and then Russ will take over with Q&A.
Okay. Let me leave you quickly with just a couple more principles from economics and from life in general. I like to say this: free people are not equal, and equal people are not free. Now, there's a principle. Free people are not equal, and equal people are not free. What do I mean by that? When it comes to equality before the law, I don't think there should be any dispute that that's a very important and honorable principle. The notion that the law should be blind, the blindfolded goddess of justice should not peak, that you should be determined guilty or innocent of something you're charged with based upon whether you did it, not according to your color, your religion, your ethnic background, or so forth. That's an important principle. When it comes to economic equality, free people aren't going to have that because free people are different. We're different in terms of the talents that we have and how we deploy them. We're different in terms of our willingness to work. That makes a difference in the incomes that we generate, the economic incomes. We're different in terms of the savings we generate. If we could equalize everybody tonight materially, by noon tomorrow, we'd have inequality because some people would spend it and some people would save it. So it's illusory to think that the law or any other mechanism could somehow make people what they aren't, which is economically equal, because we're not economically equal. When somebody excels, when they're no longer just part of the common man blob, and they stand out for their honesty, their entrepreneurship, their wisdom, their skills, I say hallelujah. I don't envy that. I don't think a free people should. We should say, good for you. You're a model for the rest of us. But socialists love to tear down successful people, and they think it's better that we're more equal than unequal economically. And I just think that's not viable. Never has been. Finally, sometimes people ask me, what do you think the most important issue is in society or in America or the world? And I always enjoy this question because it gives me a chance to say that the most important issue here, everywhere, now, and at all times has been the same. The most important issue, because everything else flows from it, is character, personal character. And you can have good character, you can have bad character, but I mean by character, I mean it in a good sense. That cluster of virtues that are time honored. I think as a Christian, I would have to say also God inspired and God mandated. Things like honesty, commitment to the truth, That's why I hate to hear these days, you hear so often in Washington, oh, he spoke his truth. She spoke her truth. Every time I hear that, I think, what? Is that any different from the truth? If it is, well, then those people better get their act together. I want to be on the side of the truth, not somebody's personal whim about it. We don't ask people to swear when they go into a courtroom to swear on a Bible that they will abide by this truth, that truth, his truth, her truth, whatever anybody claims is the truth. We say we want you to swear to the truth. That's important. A society that gives up on the truth, that decides that expediency is the most important thing, what advantages me for the moment, no matter what the long term consequences might be. Any society that travels that path is a society in deep, deep trouble. Again, we should know what we believe. There are principles out there that we should embrace. We shouldn't say the truth is relative, it changes, it's different from one person to another. It's nothing objective about it. That's the path to chaos and disaster. So character is important, and it means more than just honesty. It means responsibility. It means courage, especially in a dangerous world where there are plenty of people who would take your life or your rights or your property or your country if you gave them the opportunity. Courage is important to a free people. Also, gratitude is a value I think we underappreciate. The notion that well, let me put it this way. What is gratitude? Gratitude is nothing less than the recognition that not all the good things that have come your way have been of your own doing. Okay. Some good things have come your way, really a lot more than you might imagine, not entirely because of you, but because of any number of others. A parent who gave you good guidance, a teacher who inspired you to learn, uh, a what was the example I always like to use? Well, you get the point. That uh, yeah, the example I like to use is an entrepreneur who created an enterprise, gave you employment, invented, innovated, provided products that were heretofore beyond your reach. You know, we should be grateful all the time for all these things that other people do, even though nobody's telling them, hey, I'll shoot you unless you go provide uh, bread for the masses. No, all these marvelous things in a free economy happens for reasons of incentive and self-interest, but they end up serving so many people in the process. I think it's a marvelous mechanism. So all of that makes up and more. It makes up individual character, and I think you will not find throughout the course of history any nation that lost its character and kept its liberties. That's how important the connection is between liberty and character. A nation that loses its character will ultimately lose its liberties. It will descend into chaos. Dishonest people will lie, prevaricate, and timid people will never speak truth to power. I mean, you got to have strong character to emerge from this dangerous world as a free and prosperous people. Uh, uh, nothing else will suffice. And if we don't get the character issue right, if we don't fix it wherever it's gone bad, almost nothing else is going to matter because so much flows from the kind and character of people that we are. With that, I hope I've said enough to prompt some questions. Thanks to everybody for listening, and I'm ready for your discussion.
All right. Well, thank you, Larry. I lost my video, just classic. I think it was just 4 minutes before Larry was finishing up. Somehow my video's not working. So I apologize for that, first of all. Um, my name's Russ McCullough. I was going to do a short introduction. I'm the Wayne Angel Chair of Economics at Ottawa University and the founder of the Gortney Institute. And so Jim Gortney was a graduate, and I went to a KPI event probably about 12 years ago now, and I bumped into George Pearson there. And I said, "Do you know Jim Gortney?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I know Jim Gortney." And so from then on, We've been participating in various things with KPI and enjoy the relationship that we have with them. On the screen here as well, his video is working, is Dr. Justin Clark. He's our Menard Family Professor of Philosophy and Ethics. And we also have one other professor that may be on this morning, but Dr. Peter Jacobson. So the professor team makes up what we do at Ottawa, really. And it's a lot of what you're hearing in this, what Larry speaks of, and what we're going to do in this series. I tell you, I've been told nobody else in the Midwest is doing what we're doing at Ottawa University in terms of liberty and freedom and getting these principles taught. Just to give you an example, if a student comes to Ottawa as a business student, they're going to have to take principles of micro and macroeconomics, and they're either going to have myself or they're going to have Dr. Jacobson. And so nobody gets out of Ottawa without having a dose of liberty and freedom principles. And then Dr. Clark also teaches some of our philosophy. So we really think it's one of the best places in the Midwest for students to come to college and get that type of education. So Dave Trebert approached me on this project, and he just said, there's a lot of people on our team, but they just lack principles. They get into office, and without having the principles there, it's hard to take action. And so that's kind of how this whole Pearson-Navy Liberty Academy has started, and what we're putting together, and we hope that it can be enriching for many people. These sessions are going to be recorded. And we're also going to have a certificate available for people who have gone through all of them. Now, you do have a little bit of homework. I know some of you might not like that, but just a short reflection paper that'll be graded by the professor team here at Ottawa University. And it's just going to be a pass-fail. We just want to see that you've taken the time to reflect on the things that you've learned from each session. And by doing each of the sessions, you'll graduate and have a certificate from the Pearson-Navy Liberty Academy. And so we're excited to bring that. Our next person coming up is in February 28th, Saturday morning, Dr. Rachel Ferguson, who I've had the pleasure of speaking with and having as a guest at our university, and I've heard her speak at conferences. The topic there is why freedom. So why in the first place is that? Larry touched on some things. She's a philosophy professor, but she's also rooted in economics, kind of similar to Dr. Clark, actually. So, and a lot of what we go through, I've been surprised when you learn the history, how relevant people's thoughts were hundreds of years ago to today. It's truly amazing. And these are the principles that we want people grounded in as they take action, whether it's in policy or networking with their friends, family, and communications that they have. So we have links in the chat that you can register for the upcoming events. Again, February 28th is our next one, Why Freedom. After that, just to give you some of the topics, limited government is one, free speech, economic freedom, the culture of economic freedom, and freedom and technology. So we're going to hit a lot of different areas, have some great speakers. Like Larry Reed to lead, and then also have these practical applications. So it's really a two-step process with each one as we go through to here's the principles, here's some examples of how that could be applied in your life or in policy. So James wanted me to remind people or explain to people how to ask a question. So you have the chat box down there. So if you hover your cursor, you'll find chat, and then you'll be able to type in a question. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to everybody's questions, so between Dr. Clark and I, we'll kind of go through those and try to call them out. And when we find one, and Jonathan, at 10:02 a.m., you asked a question in the chat, and you're going to be first after Justin and I have a question for Larry. So that's going to be how we'll proceed. We'll announce you. And then if you want to unvideo mute so Larry can see who you are and you can ask your question. But that was at 10:02 a.m., Jonathan. So be ready. You're in third position here for questions. So, okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Clark and see if he's got some gaps to fill with what my opening comments were, and then he'll be asking the first question to Larry, and then I'll follow with my question, and then we'll go to Jonathan. Justin?
Hey, great. Thanks, Russ. The one thing I would just add is that I think that when we talk about liberty and when we advocate for liberty, we are advocating and talking about things in at least three different domains. There's an economic domain to the advocacy of liberty, there's a philosophical or moral domain for the advocacy of liberty, and there's a political domain for the advocacy of liberty. And one of the
Mhm.
things we try to do at the Guartney Institute is to make sure that our students are educated in all three of those domains, because even if you are very clear about the economic advantages of liberty, if you aren't able to philosophically defend the morality of liberty, you can find yourself being um, unable to defend your preferred policy. And the same goes for if you just know the philosophical angle or the moral angle and not the economic angle, or both of these can be attacked by political arguments about which arrangements are stable. And so this idea is that we want, our students to have all three legs of this stool very stable. And that's the reason we have, the great speakers like Larry Reed and Rachel Ferguson, and we have these different people who agree about some conclusions, but have expertise in different domains. And of course, thank you, Larry, because you have expertise in so many of these domains. I guess the first question I had for Larry is, you mentioned in your talk that liberty seems to be required for a good life, and that it's a kind of necessary ingredient. And then you also mentioned that the United States was this grand project um, explicitly advocating for liberty, which hadn't been done before. And I guess my question is, if liberty is a necessary component for a good life, do we think there are necessary components for liberty to take hold? That is there a reason why this happened in the United States when it did? And
Mm.
sometimes the answers we get are no. Liberty, you can just sprinkle liberty anywhere and it'll work, or we can think that there's some kind of cultural component that is a necessary prerequisite for systems based on liberty to thrive.
Yeah. Oh, great question, Justin. I also appreciated what you said earlier about what you do at Ottawa University and the ways that you cover the waterfront in making the case for liberty. You can now count me among the biggest fans that Ottawa University has and the Gortney Institute. I think what you guys are doing and what you're all about is so needed in this country. Well, even our founders, I'm thinking it was Madison who may have said, or could have been Adams, one of the two put it so well when he said that liberty, people who lack character are simply not fit for liberty, something to that effect. That was the point he was trying to make. In other words, he was saying liberty springs first from character. You can't have people who are dishonest, who prevaricate, who steal, who are irresponsible, who are ungrateful, who are timid. Uh, you can't have characterless people suddenly decided, hey, let's have liberty. Character has to bubble to the surface first, and it's then when a people have sufficient character, how does that affect their thinking? They start to think, well, it would be wrong for me or for someone on my behalf to steal from another person. What belongs to someone else is kind of sacred. It's nothing I can rightfully just go take because I want it. Or hey, because we are unique individuals, we're all valued, then we shouldn't have a system where somebody at the top gets to tell everybody what to do at every turn and throw them in jail if they disagree. So the ideas of or the structure, I would say, of liberty, of a republic, rule of law, all that that entails, that tends to flow from a people who have come to some conclusions about character first. Maybe they haven't so much thought it through or written it down, but they instinctively practice the virtues that are necessary, I think, to then craft a political and economic system rooted in liberty. So yeah, I just don't see a free republic arising from corrupt people. So again, it gets back to character. Got to have that first.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. Thanks, Larry. All right,
Mhm.
my question is I'm up next, and then we'll be going to Jonathan. Um, so everybody claims to be for liberty, as you said in your talk, right? They say, "Oh, are you for liberty?" Yeah, yeah. So how could you challenge someone to question whether their version of liberty is the same as yours? Are there some things you could, try to cull out, like, well, what do you mean? So I'm just
Yeah.
curious what you think could be done there.
Yeah, another great question. I think I would start asking such a person questions like this. I would say, so the things that say you want the government to do will be voluntary, right? Uh, in other words, I would try to probe how they want to bring about the objectives that they talk about. Through peaceful means, through persuasion? Are they going to go out and give speeches about, helpful tips for better living? Uh, Look at those who favor so much more government. Let's say a socialist. Uh, or any speech by Bernie Sanders. Is it full of just helpful tips? Take them or leave them? It's full of, here's what we're going to do when we're in power with your money and your life. We're going to put on all kinds of regulations. We're going to take more. We're going to, you won't be able to patronize an alternative. You got to go to the government schools. Their whole program is a package of coercion. So I would try to get a person to tell me what methodology are they going to employ to get people to do the things they think they should do? Is it persuasion or is it coercion? Boy, if you get them to be honest about it. In other words, if they say, "Oh, well, it's democratic, so it's voluntary," well, that's not saying the same thing. If 50% plus one vote to take my house, should I just say, "Oh, well, that's okay. It was settled democratically. Take the house." So it comes down to persuasion or coercion. And as long as a person is not doing violence to the legitimate rights of another person, their right to life, liberty, property, and so forth, that person should be allowed to go about his business in peace and to disagree and to say no thanks when the government says, "I'd like to give you something." Um, so I want to know from somebody, if you're in charge, will there be more force, more coercion in society, or less? That really settles a lot in my mind. I hope I didn't get off the path there, Russ, today.
No, no, actually, that was a great answer. I'm taking notes. I'm gonna use that one myself because that really boils it down.
Okay.
I apologize, my video's off. I don't know what's wrong. I've been trying to fix it while we've been talking, but I was shaking my head the whole time, I guess, Larry.
Okay.
I
You know
just
what?
wanted to let you know, I thought that was a great way to address that. So,
Well, thank you. This is one of the things that differentiates the socialized society from a free one, in that under say capitalism, freedom, free markets, if you want to practice socialism, any variety of it, like share and share alike, everybody makes the same and we distribute it equally, or if you want to practice that, you're free to do that if you can get other people to voluntarily sign up. You can go neighbor to neighbor and say, "Hey, everybody, let's just take our earnings and put it in the common storehouse and divvy it up equally." And if everybody says, "Yeah, let's do that," you can do that if you want. Uh, but under socialism, if you want to be a capitalist, if you say, "No thanks to the government, I think I'll start my own business," or "I don't need that, thank you very much," then the Gestapo show up and to tell you, "No, you're not with the program here." So there's a big difference.
right, right. All right, Jonathan, you are up if you'd like to ask your question, and if you're able to, maybe on video mute, but if you can't, that's okay too.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my question had to do with the Republic. Early on, you talked about the Rome and the Republic, and I guess how does that reconcile with special interests and large money donors? When and even corporations have a larger entity than individuals, certainly anymore, and probably maybe even back then. But how do you reconcile large money and donors and interest when the individuals in the general public just doesn't have that power?
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. Good question. By the way, I like your house. I think.
I live in a log cabin.
Oh my gosh, fantastic! I think we should vote to give it to me.
Okay, well,
Okay.
let's make sure that we get more of the. I'll put more money in that pool than you. How's that?
Okay. Well, the problem you identified, and I would never say it's not a problem, is an ever bigger problem the ever bigger government gets. Another way to put it is the smaller that government is, the less that people are going to have an incentive to try to get in charge of it, to get what they can from it, or to keep it at bay because it's just not a big factor in their lives. They have too much other more productive stuff to do. But the bigger government gets, you also find the more corrupt it becomes. Um, and one of the long term, very dangerous side effects of a big government is that it becomes so corrupt, everybody fighting over the spoils of the state. You know, look in Minnesota, $9 billion down the tube, everybody fighting each other. Well, what does that tend to do in terms of the people it attracts to government? Haven't you heard so many people so often, good people say, oh, I'm not going to run for anything. Why would I want to subject myself to that kind of character assassination and all? So you end up with the worst of both worlds, bad people running big government.
Mhm.
So I think the founders, if I could put myself in their position, would say to your question, we're worried about that too, which is another reason to keep government small in the first place. Because the bigger it is, the more the special interests will want to get in charge of it, the more they'll buy legislators and so forth. That's not to say you shouldn't have safeguards in place. Ben Franklin said people have to be vigilant. So the moment you see somebody using their corrupt influence, their money, their power, their connections to unduly influence the decisions of government, blow the whistle. It should be a major responsibility of the media, for instance. And when they stop doing that, I think the republic is in danger. Or when they start doing it only when uh, the other guy is in power, and then look askance when their guy's in power. We see a lot of that today. Then we're in trouble. So uh, put the appropriate safeguards in place, transparency. You know, I still say this, that when it comes to contributing to campaigns, I don't know that I would favor less limits rather than more, but full transparency so that everybody can see who's bankrolling this candidate. And so we can learn it before the election. And then you decide, is that a good thing or not? But no hiding stuff. And when you can find a politician who did someone's bidding in a law they introduced because they bankrolled the campaign, I think we should try to prove it. And if we do, get rid of them. But how often do people really hold their politicians accountable to things like character? I see congressmen all over the country elected thoroughly and obviously corrupt, but they get reelected because the people don't care. Oh, he brings home the bacon for me, so I don't care if he adds some lard for himself. Well, that's what you get then. So if the people don't put character on a pedestal, they can't expect their leaders to. I think you're muted.
Okay. So, yep, John Todd, I have you up next. Your question from 9:47 a.m.
Thank you, Larry. In your view, have we kept our republic, or are we wrong? And if we haven't, how do we regain it?
Good to see you, John, and all your stuff in the background. You look like my office.
That's my legacy.
Okay.
And I'm going to miss going to the Nifty Nut with you today.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of my friends who want even less government than me often say, well, see, the Constitution hasn't so worked out. Look at all the government we have now. So it really didn't limit government like it was supposed to. So that's a flaw of the Constitution. I always say, wait a minute. I don't think the Constitution has failed us. I think we have failed the Constitution. We just kind of cast it aside and don't hold our representatives accountable whenever they violate it because we're more interested in other things like the bacon they bring home. So we are on a slow slide to losing some of those things our founders gave us. But I'd be the last person to say that the demise of the republic is somehow inevitable. I don't believe that. If I did, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, which is trying to educate. So we just have to get people to once again appreciate what our founders gave us, how far we've drifted from it. why that's dangerous. What a great opportunity we're going to have to do that over the next 6 months with the anniversary coming up. So I just say, John, those of us like you who believe in liberty, just do not give up, never throw in the towel, don't let despair rule your life. Things can turn on a dime, and we all we know for sure is they won't if good people don't do what's necessary to fight for what's right.
Okay, Brent Davis, we have you up with your question from a little bit ago, 10:47 a.m. on the chat. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So 1047. Is that what about civics? Yeah. So I guess this is definitely an effort, but how can we correct the civics taught by Marxists and resist folks in the public schools and their community schools here in Wichita that they've started now? Uh, Obviously, PELA is a step, but maybe we can think about how we can promote these ideas. I like the idea with the Independence Day coming up. How can we do things in our neighborhoods to help promote that?
That's another good question, Brent. Well, I think, first of all, by our examples, we educate. So we have that's the one thing over which we have the greatest control, how we think and how we behave and how we act and what kind of an example we may be for others. So I would say to everybody, start by asking yourself, am I as good an example of what I preach as I could be? If not, then I need to work on that. And that could be everything from the values you practice to your ability to be persuasive, your entrepreneurial use of unplanned opportunities to educate. I tell you, there's not a day that goes by that I don't observe a parent doing or not doing something that prompts me to immediately think, up, missed opportunity, missed opportunity. Just the other day, a son of one of my neighbors I was talking to the neighbor. The son come running out with a cell phone in hand and did not bother to say, "Oh, excuse me, Mom, can I have a second of your time?" Or, "Oh, hi, Mr. Reed. You mind if I ask my mom something?" He just came in, interrupted, blurted out what he wanted her to know, and then took off, never even said hello. And she didn't say anything like, "Hey, Jim, that's no way to behave. Say hello to your neighbor. And yes, let's take a moment." And, missed opportunity. I see that all the time. So I think parents need to be more active in the education of their kids. We've kind of consigned that now to the state. So we assume that, hey, that's kind of like free babysitting. That's a good deal. Let them do it. It's not my responsibility. And so we never look at the textbooks the kids bring home. We never meet with a teacher and say, now, are you telling them this side, or are you only telling them one side or your side? We don't blow the whistle often enough as parents. I think we need to get more active that way. That's happening, I'm happy to say, in part because of the effects of COVID. When parents finally got to see on a computer screen some of what the kids were being taught that the parents had to wonder about. There's a lot more involvement there. We need to get far more involved in the education of our kids. Supplement, if you can't take your kid out of a government school and put them in a better place, at least supplement their education with the things you read to them or have them read on their own. Don't just assume that the education of your kid is the government's responsibility and your job is just to make supper.
All right, up next we have Heather Eby from 1032. To the extent we've lost our original character as a nation, who has failed us the most?
Oh, yeah, who has failed us the most? I'm going in my mind. It's kind of going back and forth between academia and not you guys at Ottawa, academia or the religious institutions. Pastors and priests, leaders in churches are still viewed by people as having immense moral standing and that's as it should be. But too often, they don't really take stands on strong moral issues. They don't explain to people that, it's still stealing if you vote for politicians who take it instead of you going next door and getting it at gunpoint. I mean, they avoid such controversies, such real life applications of, like, the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal. It doesn't say thou shalt not steal unless the other guy has more than you do, or unless you can hire a politician to do it on your behalf. So all those important moral principles that are underpinning a free society, I think too many religious leaders have just walked away from that. So they're part of the problem. They should be leading us in moral directions. And once they did, but not so much today. They're often part of the problem. And the other one, academia. Yeah, a lot of these bad ideas that we're paying an awful price for today really originated in the ivory tower. And that's a place, as Thomas Sowell told us, that's a place where ideas don't have to work in order to be subsidized and propagated, because that's the nature of the system. They can be stupid ideas and still, you can get a six-figure salary for propagating them, because the test of reality never applies to you. Reality is what the legislators send you to subsidize it. So academia some decades ago started to buy into this way of thinking, including moral relativism and so forth, that are toxic to society. So I think those are the two most damaging institutions in recent decades. But boy, that's a tough choice. I can point to a lot of others too.
All right. Well, I think, Bill, you will have our last one here, and we'll start to wrap things up and probably send it back over to James.
Larry, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. I really appreciate you doing this for us, and I've enjoyed it very much. My question was pretty easy, and I think maybe somebody answered it potentially. But I was asking the question: is there a book you recommend that really explores the connection between the Roman Republic and the creation of the U.S. Constitution, that provides specific examples of things that were mistakes that Rome made, and I think it would be very helpful as a tool for someone who believes in liberty to be able to cite the specifics of the Roman Empire, because I think everybody agrees that it started out as a great thing and then destroyed itself. And
Yeah.
is there something you recommend? I've already downloaded at somebody's recommendation in the chat your book. Are We Rome? Is that what you recommend? I have not read it yet.
Well, that is a short pamphlet, like a monograph, but it's got some of that stuff in there. I'm trying to find it, but I think it's going to take too much time. Well, I tell you what, there are good books. I'm drawing a blank as to authors and titles, but they're in the bibliography of my forthcoming book, because I have a chapter on this very subject. I'm just drawing a blank as to authors and titles. If anybody who's interested, Bill, you or anyone else, you can email me at lreed, LREED, at fee.org, and just make mention of you'd like some good Roman history connection stuff. I can send you half a dozen or more good sources.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
If you're interested in particular Roman great men of ancient Rome, unfortunately, women had such subordinate roles back then that you don't learn as much about them as we should. But the great men include Cicero, and the best biography of him is by a British author named Anthony Everett, and it's simply called Cicero. Anthony Everett, Everett or ETT, one of those two. But Cicero, oh my gosh, Cicero is always on my list of one of the 10 people I would most want to go back and have an hour with in history if I could. But if you email me, I'll send you more explicitly what you're looking for.
Well, I'll do that. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.